Hey everybody, Brendan here. Welcome back to another tournament game analysis video. This is game number, let me check because there's a lot of games. It is game number 142 for my road to Chess Master. Now, this time I am playing against someone who I played before. I will put on the screen what game number that was, and there will be a link in the description to the other one. That one I had a decent position, actually a pretty big advantage, and I completely blew it. I overpressed and I ended up losing. So there were a couple mixed emotions going into this game because one, I was able to get an advantage against this person, but two, I wasn't able to actually convert that advantage at all. So that's important for me to think about. I played e4, as I always do, and then we see c6. So I'm kind of expecting the Caro-Kann, but I also tried to research my opponent a little bit, and I really wasn't expecting one. What normally happens is c6 and then d6, so it's like a perk defense style position sometimes as well. So I was kind of expecting both, maybe Caro or a perk. And d6 is actually played. So generally I believe that white has a very slight advantage against the perk, and it just has to do with the space, right? When we look at it, white is controlling all of these central squares, and although black is controlling these ones and they are central, they're a little bit less advanced. So generally white has a pretty good time here, and you can actually see that from the results from games, master games here. So knight to c3, yeah, the last game we did play, by the way, it was d5, e5, and I believe bishop to f5. That's how it went. But yeah, d6, knight c3, and then g6, and yeah, that's the perk setup. And this is obviously what you expect, especially after d6 and c6 are played. So overall, I'm pretty happy, but there's still some nerve left, or there's still some nerves left. And the reason why is because this is also kind of resembling a King's Indian defense, which is something I have experience in. But with it being a perk instead, you don't really have the same play as white, where you go for the c-file, as in the King's Indian usually. It has to do with playing c4 and d5. And because that's not really an option here, I tend to just go for some sort of same-ish setups. And yeah, that's actually what I do in this game. With bishop to e3, queen d2, and then there's actually an interesting move here, a5, which is what they played. And I played f3, which is the same-ish idea. One of the big things that you want to do, for example, is if black were to move their knight here, then you can actually bring your knight to f2. And the reason why it could actually be good on f2 is because it actually helps with g4. And if they ever play something like h5, then your knight's actually defending that square a little bit more. So you are prepared to just leave tension in the hope that they end up taking for you. So that's one thing to think about. So yeah. Here, we should go back, though, because a5 is not a common move. As you may see, b5 is actually the most common. Knight d7 is quite popular as well, and knight to f6 is trailing that. b5 is simply better because it also means that we don't get this a4 move, but also we want a4 because they want to play b5. So these two moves are kind of playing against each other, right? Whoever gets one of those moves in first is usually slightly happier than the other. And the reason why is because, well, a5 or a4 it kind of restricts their queen side, right? When they want to play b5, they're also potentially threatening b4 to kick this knight. And also, if we end up castling long, then they've already started some sort of advancement on the queen side. But with a5, this isn't really the case. Now, I probably should have accepted that this is not the right move, but I'm not sure at the time if I knew that a5 wasn't really the right move here. because it kind of looks natural, right? It's the same idea where if I castle long, then b5 comes, and they start attacking me on the queen side. But because they didn't play b5 first, there is the option of a4. And I give it an exclam just strategically, just because, again, preventing b5 is just a massive idea. And you can actually start considering castling long after this, because b5, you'll be winning material when that happens. Arguably, you could say that because you pushed a pawn in front of your king, like castling long looks a little bit riskier. But the whole thing is it's an attack on opposite sides, and h4, h5 is coming too. So a4 does a pretty good job of actually stopping a lot of queenside play. But we can still castle short, so there's a lot of flexibility, which is really nice. Instead, I played f3, just going for my same idea. This is probably inaccurate, though, mainly because of the fact that a4 was a pretty decent move. And then my opponent played knight to a6. Now, again, if they play knight d7, then knight to h3 is justified. So I think that this is the reason why they went for this move. But at this point, we can kind of conclude that white is just clearly better. And the reason why is because we've taken on a pretty natural development scheme with our pieces so far. This bishop doesn't really have to move quite yet. There's no reason to take. I mean, that looks like an option, but we don't really have to consider any extraneous moves here. Mainly because we're kind of primed for an attack, especially after knight to a6. And that's exactly why I go g4. You could still consider a4, but I think the idea behind knight to a6 kind of gets shown a little bit more, where they might want to go knight to c7, and if they get the chance, they'll eventually go b5. So yeah, there's a little null move in there. So of course they had 2 moves in a row, but again, strategy sometimes is about looking at what your opponent could do if they could play a couple moves in a row without a silly response. Like, for example, knight b4 takes on c2 check. Of course we would take that, right? That's not strategy, that's just tricks. But something like knight to c7, this is like nb5 immediately, like just thinking about this idea is really important. So yeah, I spent a long time on g4. This was my first long think of the game. I think my concerns here were that there's a lot of dragon positions, the dragon Sicilian, where you play g4 before h4, or you play these types of positions, and your opponent plays h5, and it's hard to think of what to do next. Now, unfortunately, I played this incorrectly. Sadly. Oh, a little tired, man. Okay. So, after g4, h5, I played g5, and this is a mistake. The reason why is because there's actually a really forcing line, and you can actually think of this in a couple other openings. There's the King's Indian, actually, where this happens. If we go all the way back, there's this idea, if I just show it on the board, because I would actually really like to show it. There's this idea in the mainline King's Indian that you might see sometimes. E4, D6, knight to F3, castles, bishop to E2, E5, castles, knight C6, D5 here. Where at some point, like B4, they might play A5. And this seems completely irrelevant at first, right? And the move here is bishop to A3. So why am I showing you all of this? Well, the problem here is it looks like there's not going to be any pawn breaks after taking, and b6. So this is all about making the right pawn break under a good circumstance. So in this position specifically, now it looks like white has nothing. There's no c5 break, so they must be worse. This is something I would actually play a lot when I was lower rated, because usually white wouldn't know how to continue. And that's kind of a powerful thing. There's kind of one big way to continue the position. And if I add a couple null moves in here, if I can, let's see. I'm not sure exactly if I can. Let's just go king h8 or a4, which is the move. King h8, let's say. Or actually, it says 98 is... We could just follow theory. Why not? After 98, eventually you're going to go a5, and you're going to be able to trade this pawn off or create a weakness with a takes on b6. And then if you create a weakness here, now you've opened up some lines. So it's not as big of a deal. Like, again, let's just say a5, right? Why not? And yeah, well, okay, c5 is a response here, but let's ignore that and just take. So now you've officially opened up lines, and c5 is actually potentially playable now, something that wasn't possible before. And then on the alternative, this isn't a good move, obviously, but just to illustrate the point, if you take here, now there's a pawn on the b file that you could start attacking. So you can create play this way. Again, why would that ever be relevant? It doesn't really seem like it would be, but here it is. And the thing is, you actually want to take this pawn. I didn't because this was just not something I thought was applicable, but it's kind of the same thing when you think about it. After taking, you can go h4, knight to f6, you go knight g to e2, and then what do? Well, you go knight to g3, and you're getting kind of the same moves in, like it kind of feels like that. Where after rook h8, now you finally have h5, and even if this actually sacrifices a pawn, this is completely worth it. So a lot of this game could hinge on missing this idea. This is a very strong one. So if you're playing Perk, or if you're playing King's Indian Defense, or really anything, don't always be too concerned whether or not a pawn break looks like it's immediately available, especially in these cases where you have to give up, you know, that G or that B pawn. And then they play something like b6 or whatever. This is like a less extreme case of it, I guess, because there we're going for, in the comparison, f5, but there's no, like they have g6 and e6, and there's no g pawn. So maybe like it doesn't feel too applicable, but now after pushing the h pawn, we could have gotten that f5 in. I hope that is a good enough explanation, though. I think it's super important. But yeah, you could actually continue here. So after takes, there's bishop g5. And this is a really smart move. The whole point is you're actually threatening to take at some point and just take this pawn back. And yeah, this is very effective, and white has a big advantage here. But I didn't see that. I wasn't thinking about things like that. And now that I finally actually see this idea, I don't think I'm going to forget it. So hopefully that's good for you guys too. I played g5. G5 to me made a lot of sense. First off, it prevents knight f6 and it prevents knight h6. It's a restrictive move. That looks like a really good thing. But let's consider what the position's going to look like in about 10 moves. Where is white castling and where is black castling? White is probably castling long, right? Because they've pushed their g-pawn. This side feels a little airy. I mean, sometimes you actually see the king still go here, like even a king f2 at the right moment could be a playable move. But with g5, the big problem is there's not going to be any lines to attack on the king side. And yeah, it's just kind of an issue. So when we castle long, let's just say they go e6, which they do, and then knight to e7, or castles long, knight to e7, and then they're ready to castle. So let's just play a random move, knight e2, and then castles. It's quite clear how black's going to continue their attack. They're going to be playing b5 and b4, maybe even c5 to open up their bishop. There's going to be lines against the white king. But with playing g5, you're starting to notice probably there's not really an equivalent for white. So this move easily could mean that white is worse. It's definitely a mistake. So instead, the game went after e6, a3. And here, knight to e7 to continue developing. D5 is actually an interesting option because since I closed the king side down, I really need to create some sort of pawn break, open things up at least a little bit so there's potential lines against them. And after c takes, e takes, and something like e5, there's actually this interesting move, queen to f2. You're kind of threatening the a5 pawn, but you also have that b5 square, which is really nice. So this position's definitely not over or anything, but it's severely hurt, I guess I could say. I played a3, knight e7, and then bishop to d3, just focusing on development. I think that black is probably slightly better at this point. We see bishop d7. I go knight g to e2, knight c7, and again, we can see that b5 is coming. And this is kind of scary. So I don't even bother castling here. I go f4, trying to go for some sort of play, either on the king side or in the center. And my next move becomes quite apparent that there's some sort of dramatic change I'm trying to make. I play e5. Now, I'm fully expecting d5. I think d5 is probably the best move, but it's also something I'm happy to see. The reason why is because then I almost can justify castling short at that point because the center has been closed down and things are a little bit more clear. If they don't do this, then maybe it feels like I can't castle short. But d5 is best. And the reason why it's best is because this knight in particular could find some good squares. Knight e4 is now all of a sudden available. Knight d6 would be a big threat. But also getting to the c5 square or even f6 squares could be useful. My opponent took on e5, and this is a mistake because the knight is actually incredibly strong here, even if I don't exactly know where I'm going to castle. I took back with the d pawn. I didn't really see a point with the f pawn. It weakens g5, and d4 would be on an open file. We see knight e to d5. And then I go bishop to c5 to prevent castling. I'm okay with a couple trades here as well. I don't think they particularly hurt me. Like, for example, knight takes on c3, knight takes on c3. I'd be pretty happy, actually, with this, especially if they try something like knight d5 to continue trading, because I might actually just ignore this altogether with knight e4. And yeah, I think I'd be pretty happy here. My opponent played bishop to f8, trying to trade off the dark square bishop. But yeah, a move like knight e4 looks quite strong. I took on f8 because I'm happy to trade these two pieces off because it weakens that d6 square. So after bishop takes, king takes, there's knight to e4. But there's actually a really strong move, and this is a computer move. I don't think I would have thought about this over the board because it looks really risky, and that is bishop to d6. Now, it doesn't really have a specific idea in mind here. The whole point is that taking on d6 isn't really something that black wants to do, but what else really is there to do here? It's not clear. So taking on d6 is something we have to look at, because now after e takes, this pawn could be weak. But when you start going through the lines, it's actually really hard to find a problem with this. After knight to a6, knight to e4, the pawn on d6 now actually isn't even a weakness, but it's actually a strength. For example, Stockfish's suggestion is really promising here with the idea of c4. Let's go through here. When we get c4 in, we're able to take back, of course, and we're threatening bishop takes d5 every single time with knight f6 check. And that knight is just a massive problem. So what did we learn from this move? This was actually to pretty much displace this knight on a6 to go to a6 at least, so we could make sure that they don't have a good knight on d5. And because they don't have a good knight on d5, that also means, well, right now they do, but they won't in a few moves. That means that we get f6. So a line that can continue is castles, c4. Yeah, not castling, not worried about any of this stuff, just absolutely going for the maximum. B takes c4, bishop takes c4. And I tried to find just like a normal move that didn't look like too crazy. Like there's already winning ideas here for white, but I thought a normal-ish one was just king g7. But of course this still loses because of bishop takes and then knight to f6. And the problem is, even if you played knight f6 or played it in a different way and then got a knight f6 with check, there's always going to be queen d4 later. And you're going to be threatening some pretty nasty discoveries on the diagonal here. And there's not really a good way for black to deal with it, at least not right away. You're threatening to win a piece right off the bat. That's a pretty big deal. And yeah, maybe rook h8 followed by king f8, but that still loses material, right? Rook h8, queen d4. If you go king f8, knight takes. And you're losing that rook and actually this rook as well. So yeah, just completely winning here. Let's delete those moves. Okay. I still thought for a couple minutes here though whether or not to take or play knight e4. Obviously, I think taking is probably fine, but bishop d6 was a really cool one. I played knight e4. We see queen to e7, and now I played b3. So b3 was played for 3 reasons. If black plays a4, I have b4. That's 1. If b4, then I have a4. That's 2. And also, I have c4. And I can recapture with the pawn, so then they don't have a knight there anymore. And that actually is kind of useful. But I also could have considered castling here, but I was just really worried about a4. And the reason why is because then b4 comes next. If b4, then you could actually consider a4 instead. So a4 to get b4 in, to make sure that there's some sort of pawn break to open things up. But I could play things actually pretty normally here. c3, c5, knight g3, h4. And this knight g3 move looks a little silly at first, but again, there's another really strong idea, knight f6. Just completely ignoring the knight. And you can't actually take it, because in this position, you are actually losing as black. Can you find the move to win the game, actually? This is a good exercise. It's not quite immediately clear, because it actually looks fine until you see this move. This is really important to win the game. So the idea is rook to h2. And the whole point is it doesn't matter. They're not going to get the h file if they take. But you're threatening to just go rook h1, take everything, and then queen h2, queen h7, and then queen g8 is just checkmate at the end. So if they shuffle, for example, knight a6, rook h1, knight c7, you're already winning, because after you take everything, queen h2, queen h7, and queen g8 is now checkmate. But if you take, queen takes, rook to h8 looks like the natural move, but we don't just need a queen to checkmate, we could use a rook as well. Queen takes on h8 with check. King takes, rook h1 check, king g7, rook h7 check, king f8, rook h8 check, king g7, and rook g8 with checkmate. This all looks pretty insane, but I feel like h4 is pretty natural, and taking is honestly too, until you realize that there's this rook h2 move. It doesn't actually look like there's anything at first. I feel like someone would easily do this and go king g7 and think they're fine, because again, you can't take on h8. You have to find rook h2. So yeah, some pretty insane lines. Seems a little bit out there, but I thought I would show it anyways. but that's really complicated. That's part of the reason why I probably chose b3. We see b4, and I go a4, and to me, this means that white is actually just clearly better. You're ready to castle now, and there's not going to be an immediate pawn break. I was still a little bit worried about this, so you don't see me castle right away, because there's always potential ideas of, first off, c5 and even c4, but also maybe even c5 and then some sort of sacrifice, or even knight b6 and then taking, just to rip open lines. And sometimes these types of sacrifices work perfectly. And in fact, the reason why I might not want to castle is because there's still not a clear way for me to attack on their king side, but there's a very clear way for them to sacrifice and get a vicious attack against my king. So king g7, I go bishop c4, and then we see c5. I'm not really in a rush to take this knight. And this goes back to an idea from Dvoretsky, which is the superfluous knights. If we evaluate this bishop and this knight, you might say that their knight is better, and that's probably true. But what about this bishop and this knight? Now, I think that's where you start saying that this bishop is a bit better. So when two knights are placed like this, the superfluous knights, that's pretty much an explanation where their knights are fighting for the same square, but only one of them can actually take that square. So taking on d5 is pretty silly. First off, there's knight takes d5. Of course, this actually might be an option too, because it helps with c4. But at the very least, knight takes on d5 is incredibly serious, and there's not really a reason to consider it after that. I got too fancy with things. I went rook g1. I probably should just consider castling, and I'm not really sure why I was avoiding it. I think maybe it had to do with, again, knight b6 related moves, but yeah, at some point you just gotta play it. Oh yeah. Ooh. Like for example, knight b6. I mean, even queen d6 here looks like a decent defensive move. But yeah, I didn't play that. Instead, I played rook to g1. And the reason why, I do have a good reason behind this move. It's because I'm worried about this bishop. Now, this actually highlighted a pretty big weakness in my game that I didn't recognize at the time when I was playing, and took me a couple years. Because this game's about 2 years old. My big weakness is actually commitment in these positions, or just in positions in general. I didn't want to commit with something like castling long or castling short or anything, even if it was a good move, because I was worried, one, that there's better, and two, that it clarifies things too much for both me and my opponent. I like clarification for myself, but not necessarily for my opponent, especially because it'll help them come up with moves to play. So rook g1 aimed at making sure that against bishop c6 there's no weirdness on this diagonal. It does make sense, but I really should have just castled. There's sometimes you have to commit. So bishop to c6 was played, and then I go knight to g3. And here h4 works. There's no rook h1 stuff. There's no tricks anymore. Maybe if I castled and everything, then I could just go for that knight f6 move, maybe. But even then, you have to worry. Well, you can't take it immediately because you win the queen. But yeah, it's a different position. So I would have to go knight e2. They could just go rook a8. It looks like rook h8 is best, but surprisingly, rook a8 is a little bit better, just because the rook is nice defending the pawn. And after bishop to d3, making sure that there's no discoveries, now they have knight b6 and c4. For example, if knight d6, they have knight e8, just trading off the knight. And then if I go knight to f2, because something has to be done about this knight as well, because there was a pin, they're threatening to take it. Now c4. And black is winning here, for sure. There's no question about that. So, yeah, h4 would have just been a big blow to my position, and I'm probably lost. But we see rook a8 first. Now, I went queen f2, and to me, this means the position's no longer clear because I actually have the option to take on c5. And taking on c5 is, even if it's not necessarily the best move, it's a move that can help. And for example, after h4, knight e2, knight b6, I could take on c5 actually. And after queen c5, knight c5, they can take on c4. I'm up a pawn, but they have decent counterplay. I probably would be happy to play this position actually. Moves like knight b3 look pretty natural. There's something to play for still, and that's nice. That's actually really, really good compared to what my position was just a few moves ago. But we see knight to b6, and I go knight d6 with the idea of taking. I don't know why I was avoiding queen takes c5. It looks like somewhat a reasonable move, but knight d6, at least it defends c4 actually. That was the idea. It defends the bishop here. So after takes, you're able to take back with the knight, which is nice. But my opponent played rook takes on d6, and this sacrifice is actually decent. But when you sacrifice material, you gotta be really careful, right? Because I mean, first off, it's a sacrifice. If you don't get that compensation soon, then you could land in trouble. But if it works out, it works out. Hey, right? But here, it actually kind of doesn't. Because after queen takes d6, now there's a rook to d1. Computer says, I think it's like either white's slightly better or it's close to equal. I think this is easier to play for white. Just from a practical perspective. And the reason why is because that c5 pawn is still a little weak. Now it opens up that long diagonal against their queen, and they don't have a dark squared bishop. It feels like there are plans for white when previously it was hard to come up with some. So that is a big deal. That's just a big deal. Here we see knight c to d5, and I went rook to f1. There is maybe a possibility of going knight to e4. I think I was worried of queen takes f4, so I played rook f1 first. And the good thing is if they take on c4, first off, this is a blunder now because b takes c4. This knight is just pinned to the queen. They can go h4. We just go knight e4. They do have queen e7, actually. So the craziness continues because now if we take, they can take back, and they're winning back the piece. You're going to see a lot of this, actually, later on. But there's also, there's actually just knight takes c5, and we ignore this knight. And the whole reason is we're actually going to go for some sort of queen d4 check. So if they defend with something like knight c3, we go queen d4 check, e5. We can take it. There's not really time for taking on d1. First off, okay, rook f7 doesn't work, but after knight takes, there's e6 check instead, where if the king, let's just say the king moves here. I'm not saying this is the best move, just a move. But rook takes f7 check will win the queen. And if king g8, I mean, this looks bad too, because we're threatening checkmate here, and there's no immediate checks. So yeah, again, the lines are incredibly sharp here with this idea of h4 kicking the knight away, forcing it to e4, and it can't go to e2. Why? Why can't it go to e2? Let's turn on the engine, because I actually don't even know. h4, knight e2. No, this is a... Oh, right. Bishop takes on a4. I think this is what I was worried about. And then bishop takes c2. Yeah. And they just get a ton of pawns on the queen side. I'm trying not to use too many engine lines specifically when doing this analysis. I'm trying to really write down all my thoughts, everything I remember from the game and everything, because I think that's a little bit more important. So if sometimes I'm a little spacey, I'm trying my best. But yeah, knight c4 is a blunder, but it's a little complicated. They went rook e8, and the idea is just to throw e5 in my face. But now I'm ready for knight e4. And they have to find a very important move here. Queen e7. They went queen c7, which helps me a lot, because after queen takes on c5, now there's a bunch of stuff going on here. And it's actually not easy to deal with. If they go queen to e7, then they're ready to throw e5 at some point as well. And that's a pretty big deal. For example, I'll just turn on the engine once again. After queen takes on c5, queen takes c5, knight takes... there's knight takes on c4. And after taking, knight to e3. There we go. Immediately losing back that exchange. And then also a4 is quite weak. For example, let's go rook f2. Takes. I like rook c8 followed by bishop e8, forcing this knight to move. So let's just say rook d2. I'm not saying this is best. Actually, bishop f3 check just wins. So king c1. Now bishop e8 is a cool trick. The idea here is you're attacking the knight. So the knight has to move, but then you get to take the pawn, and you get to take this pawn, and you get to take this pawn, and this piece, and this piece, and this piece. Blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, really bad. So queen c7 is a big mistake because the queen trade is actually really important. But they didn't have it. So here, queen takes c5. We see knight c4 now. But b takes c4 isn't actually so bad for white. It looks a little scary because bishop takes on a4 at some point. But there's not really time for it because our knight's actually defending here. So we could actually take on d5, for example, I believe. And they're forced to take here first. They can't take here because we win their queen. That's a pretty big deal, I would say. So they played rook e7. And the whole idea here is c takes d5 is a blunder. But it's actually a really complicated blunder. And it's something that is important for us to understand. Knight to f6 is best. What a move. But this is a beautiful one. The idea here is you're threatening to take on d5. This is pretty obvious. I mean, anyone can understand that. Maybe not me. But the whole point is you're actually threatening a checkmate at some point in this position, where knight takes f6 is kind of forced because you're threatening to take, and moving away any other way is pretty dangerous. So knight takes f6, g takes, and you're forced to take this. You have to, right? Because you lose the rook. So you take it, and this is where white wins. Rook to d6. Now, this doesn't look like a big deal, because you see something like bishop to e8 or bishop to a4, and you think everything's defended. But because rook d6 was played specifically, they're cut off from e5. Now, what's available? Queen e5 with checkmate. That's pretty tough to see. It's not a lot of moves, but that's a pretty crazy variation. So I took on d5, but I thought it was actually working for me because of one specific idea. Where after e takes, there's rook to d4. And remember, I'm up in exchange. So if I could show that, then I could just be winning. It turns out that rook takes e4 is losing. So they need to play d takes on e4. The reason why is because the natural move here that we want to play, f5, doesn't lead anywhere to promising. I mean, it's a little promising, but black is actually holding out nicely. So they need to take, we take, and then bishop e8. And it turns out that there's not really an easy breakthrough to make. We can go queen f6 check, and we could even throw in g6, but we're actually not mating here. Black is totally fine. I believe now after g6, you play f takes. You don't play queen c3 check. You play f takes with queen f8 check possible. But because the bishop's on e8, you're defending that g6 pawn. And you can't break through. And, I mean, the game still goes on. Don't get me wrong. Like, this is not just over or something. But the fact that for some reason we're able to play f5 and even g6 and open things up, and it's equal material. Like we didn't even have to sacrifice anything to go at their king, and it's equal, means that our king's also in so much trouble that there's always threats of perpetual checks, and black has counterplay of their own, and that's a big deal too. So a tough move to play d takes, because the second you see f5 you just immediately discard it, but that's exactly what you had to do. My opponent took, but now this means that it's one rook against one bishop with queens on the board. So this gives me better chances. So after rook takes e4, I played rook to f2. f5 is obviously just best. The point here being that after takes, there's rook takes. There's potential threats of just a queen trade. Actually, this could work. I'm thinking, unless I'm wrong, let's just say queen d7, or even, it's hard to find a move, like a legal move, h4. I mean, to me, queen e5 check looks like it might actually just win. You have to be careful though, right? Like taking here, taking here, taking here. Yeah, this is a blunder, for example. If you take, oh, that's a big blunder. Because now after rook b5, there's b3, and they're actually holding on. So you want to go king d2 here first, and then you can take. So a little bit of a tricky idea. The whole point here being that after king d2, this pawn is still lost because there's no way for them to defend it. But yeah, so I played rook f2, and this is what I would call fancy move syndrome. I think I've heard this from someone else, so I don't want to say that this is my idea or whatever. But yeah, if it's not from somewhere else, then congratulations to me. I'm the smartest in the world. But with rook to f2, it's a little too fancy. I should just really be opening lines for my pieces. But with rook f2, I allow e3. And e3 is not such a bad move. I play rook f3, and that was kind of my ideas. I want to go rook d2 or take this pawn eventually. But then they play e2, and yeah, they're actually getting a little bit of play. And it's really annoying because it feels like they shouldn't be at all. I go rook f2, they go queen d7, and I take on e2. But then bishop to f3, and here's what I mean by the counterplay. If I played f5, then the counterplay is a lot less obvious. But I have to be careful now. I should play queen to e7. And the idea here is that after queen h3, I have queen f6 check, and this is pretty much just checkmating. King f8, queen h8, that's important to see. And any other move, king g8, queen f7, or rook h8 if you prefer, if you're nasty. And then king h7, there's queen f7, rook e8. But I played rook e7, and it turns out that this lets black in the game a little bit with queen d1 check, king f2, and bishop to d5. But it's still incredibly hard to see, because in this position, after rook to e2, the only move to have a little bit of anything here, they need to find the only move. And can you guess what this only move is? If you can't, then it doesn't matter that it's that my move was kind of it's a blunder, but I would classify it more as a mistake because it requires one specific move here, and I think it's important sometimes to override the engine, just because sometimes things aren't as easy as just looking at what the engine says, and if it says it's a draw, it's a draw, or if it says it's slightly better for white, which it was slightly better for white, I believe. So there were still chances for white, but here you need to find king h7. Any other move doesn't work because you actually completely invalidate the idea of rook e7. There's no time to play some sort of queen d4, get on the long diagonal with rook e8. And this is actually something that black needed. They played queen h1, but this gives me my chance. I go queen to d4 with check. And after king h7, now I have rook e8. And rook h8 is a threat. See how that move was with tempo. It actually matters a lot. If I didn't have queen d4 with tempo and I played queen d4 instead a move later, like here, king h7, or sorry, yeah, king h7, and then I play, well, I can't play queen d4 right now, but if I play something like rook e8, then they always at least have this check on d2, and that's annoying, right? Rook e8, queen d2, they could take this pawn, right? Like, this is a problem. Like, it's actually not simple. This queen is perfectly placed here. So that matters quite a bit. But with queen h1, queen d4 check, and rook e8, black is out of checks. Good checks, at least. They will run out of checks very quickly because I just slither over to b2 here. And yeah, white is just winning the game now. They do get that h-pawn, so there's a little bit of counterplay left, but things are kind of over. Don't blunder with king e3, because queen g1 check, king d3, queen d1, queen to e1, and then taking. And all of a sudden, it is black who is playing for the win. But just king e1. And again, queen g3 check, king d2. If they keep giving checks like queen g2 check, like I said, you slither over like a little snake, and you collect your point. But queen c3 check was played to try to keep things a little complicated. Of course, you just take that, and after bishop c6 to win the a4 pawn, very clever. I went rook a2. There might be rook to e1. I think I was worried about h4 here because they're covering the h file. H1 square, so I can't go here. I'd have to go here, but then h3 gets played, and then I have to go rook h2 because there's bishop g2 threats. Like if I play something slow like king d4, bishop g2, and then like yeah, I'm just losing a piece here because king e3, h2, and then they promote, right? Just for example, like I'm not saying this is necessarily how it would go, but that's really important. That's why I went rook e2 instead of rook e1 to try to pick up the a pawn, which looks natural, but I don't think it's right. So king d4, bishop d7, c4, h4, king c5, king g7, king d6, bishop c8, c5, h3, rook h2. Rook a2 is also probably fine. Bishop b7, c6, bishop a6, you take, h2. There's a rook to a1, and there's no time to get on that long diagonal. If they had just one extra move, they would still probably be losing, luckily, because of c7 and c8. But that's something to consider, and that matters. Rook h2, a4, rook a2, so I kind of wasted a move here, but luckily it actually works out totally fine. Bishop f1, rook a1, bishop g2, c6, h2, and then I played c7, and my opponent resigned here. They're going to win my rook, but I'm going to win the game. c7, bishop e7, I just go king d7, just to see how it would play out. Very easy win here. You could just use the dark squares. So queen f8 check, king f6, and it's just mate next move. Queen g7, no way to avoid it. So going over things, there were a couple issues I noticed with my game. This was not some sort of simple win, some sort of, destructive play. My opponent had a lot of chances and a lot of counterplay, even at the end in this bishop ending, right? Where I showed just a normal move, rook d1. That actually looks like it might not win the game. But here, when we go back to it, that rook g1 move really bothered me, I think. I thought about it after the game, and I remember seeing that move, and it bothered me, and I couldn't really explain why for a long time until actually like a week ago or a couple days ago when I checked this game for this video. The obsession of flexibility is really dangerous, so be careful of that. And sometimes you have to commit. So that's my big lesson here. That, and I guess like some of the superfluous knights, the knights that are fighting for the same square, that's a little useful, but really learning to commit. That's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Bit of a long one, but I think it was a good one too. Yeah, it was a longer game, so what can you do? That's going to be it. I'll try to keep them brief in the future, but I'm just really trying to record and have fun and just show my games the best I can. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.